One of the areas that can cause the biggest stumbling blocks in recovery is about questions and answers. How much do you tell the spouse about the affair? And unfortunately, it's also the biggest area where we can receive conflicting viewpoints from the experts.
That's very true.
The debate is about what information is given to the spouse after the affair, and how specific does it need to be. The fear is that too much information hinders healing, creates images or pictures that are harmful to a betrayed spouse's healing. Well, after working with betrayed spouses since 1998 and being one myself, I can assure you those images are there anyway.
Yeah.
If we don't know what happened, we'll create our own pictures. And what I've come to realize is that betrayed spouses tend to romanticize the affairs, the images. Low lights, music, gazing into each other's eyes, all we've ever seen in the movies. The truth is that knowing what happened can actually decrease those thoughts and images. So let me give you an example. I knew that Gary and his affair partner went to hotels. I wanted to know which ones and where. Why? Well, because every hotel I passed made me wonder, was it this one? My mind went into a frenzy, and my heart broke as I passed each and every hotel. Well, we often drove about 100 miles to see Gary's family, and I can't begin to tell you how painful that drive became as we passed lots of hotels on that highway. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it simply was a reaction that occurred. But that reaction changed once I knew which ones they had been to. I only reacted to the ones I knew they'd been to. And that meant in that particular drive that we often took, 50 hotels triggered me. And after knowing which ones they'd gone to, that number went down to 10. So slowly the healing could move forward and I wasn't overwhelmed with it. What we have found is that whenever a betrayed spouse is told that they cannot ask that question, or they do not need to know that answer, it feels like deception all over again. It feels like the secrecy of the affair is more important than the healing of the marriage.
I'm just going to interrupt because the reason the secrecy of the affair is so damaging to the healing is because in this instance, the spouse does not know what the partner knows.
Right.
And that takes you out of it.
Right.
So painful.
It is. It most indeed is. In fact, withholding information hinders the healing process. And many betrayed spouses say that also feels like more deception. Now, most experts will agree that full disclosure is necessary. And by full disclosure, that includes the who you had the affair with, the what happened, the when it happened, the where it happened, and how you were able to deceive me. The who, what, when, where, and how you were able to deceive me. However, after that list comes imposed limitations. The betrayed spouse is told that they now have a certain number of sessions or a certain amount of time to ask their questions. And this can even be from one session to a few weeks. The first problem with that approach is that because the revelation of infidelity is a trauma, and I hope you've had a chance to view that video, you are physiologically impaired to process information for a while. The betrayed spouse has difficulty thinking, much less processing during that initial time period. And until you can get some equilibrium back, your ability to process information will be impaired. And even determining what information is important will be difficult. So the common scenario is questions asked over and over and over again. Realization and comprehension of the answers takes time. It's a slow process. Believe me, as a betrayed spouse, we wish it wasn't such a slow process too. And I have to be perfectly honest, because sometimes those questions are also a test. And that is true. The unfaithful spouse has been lying throughout the affair, so the betrayed spouse has difficulty believing the one who betrayed them. And that makes sense. And if you're getting different answers to the same questions, the difficulty in believing is enhanced even more, and no forward progress can be made under those circumstances. But here is something else that we think it's important for the unfaithful spouse to understand about questions and answers. Unfaithful spouses cannot determine if their betrayed spouse knows what happened. I already answered that, you know it. You cannot tell if your betrayed spouse has been able to process the information that's been given. But you can help that processing occur, or you can hinder that processing of knowing what happened. The second problem with time limits is that if I know I have a certain amount of time to ask questions and receive answers, then I will ask any and everything I can because it's my last chance. This is especially important if the pastor or counselor is the one laying out the rules. The unfaithful spouse will likely agree, as the last thing they want to do is to answer any questions. It's painful for them too. So if I have 2 sessions to ask the questions, it will be no holds barred. I will ask any and every question I can think of before I can even consider what I know or what will help my healing and what won't.
And on the opposite end of that, you don't even know the questions you want to ask yet.
No, you really don't. That brain is just not functioning. You're still in trauma. In fact, in our opinion, time limits actually increase the possibility of images and pictures that are more harmful than helpful. Again, when a spouse is told they can't ask questions or that their questions will not be answered, the betrayed spouse feels cut off and shut down. It's divisive, and it stops the healing process right where it is. I can't tell you how many times we've encountered this problem and how often we hear that this particular issue interferes with the healing process. So this is how Hope and Healing deals with the issue of questions, answers, and details. The betrayed spouse determines what they need to know, and there is no time limit. So if I'm not sure I need to know the answer, I can pray, I can talk with my spouse, I can talk with my counselor, all the while knowing that the answer is available to me. The answer can be mine if I need it. So I can take my time, but it is my decision. The thing is that talking it all through is an essential part of healing. How did it happen? What were you thinking? It takes time to figure those things out. But there's another reason to take that time, and that is that the questions and answers are also essential for the one who was unfaithful. There's a strong tendency to self-deceive when it comes to betrayal. Adultery does not just affect the 2 people who were in the affair relationship. It reaches out and harms more, especially the betrayed spouse and other people that care and love you. In addition, knowing and understanding what happened is a huge part of preventing it from ever happening again. Well, saying, honey, I'm sorry and I promise I'll never do it again, will work just as well as when you said it in the beginning, I'll never cheat on you. Most unfaithful spouses don't plan to have an affair, so it's vital that they recognize just how they got there. And working it through together, processing what happened to your marriage is huge to rebuilding trust. Another factor to be considered is the need to know is also personality driven. A detail-oriented person will want more details. It's part of their coping mechanism. It's how they deal with life. It is necessary for their healing. We do encourage professional Christian counseling through this process, especially if there's a history of mental illness or threat of physical harm. Or if there's been a lifelong pattern of betrayal or sexual addiction, many therapists can help put that convoluted history together. The freedom the betrayed spouse is given is also a responsibility. The reason for this whole process is to heal. It is not to create more barriers between husband and wife. There's enough there already. Information is not a weapon to use against the one who harmed you. Now, we have made a worksheet available to you. The left column of the why do we ask questions is a good place to start. This is not all-inclusive, but it is representative of the answers hundreds of betrayed spouses gave when asked why they asked questions. Some of the reasons are true, whether they make sense to you or not. Some of the reasons are valid and necessary for healing. Some of the reasons are true, but not even in line with healing. We would suggest that you take a look at this list. Think about it, pray about it, talk about it together. No accusations, no jabs, just some of the whys to help you both understand this issue. Why is this information important? This is hard, but understanding what's behind the question is not always what you may think it is. But if I know that I decide what I need to know, then I'm going to be much more willing to take my time and determine just what it is I do need to know. And I'm going to be much more receptive to hear thoughts on what is commonly helpful and what is not. Then I can make wiser decisions. Your spouse does not need to, and in fact cannot, read your mind. But your actions should be an open book. And this is true for both of you. This is one big area where the transparency comes through in the healing process. And the questions will stop as the healing progresses. Neither of you can live like this for the rest of your life. And you're both going to do some things that serve well in the healing process and yet will not continue once the healing is completed. But a caution for the betrayed spouses. You have a responsibility with this freedom to determine what you need to know. Questions comparing yourself to the affair partner will serve little benefit. And those are the ones that can create intrusive thoughts and complicate healing. The truth is, a marriage and an adulterous relationship are incomparable. They are two different things with different people. One is a fantasy based on deception and lies. One is a marriage relationship created by God Himself. And it is true that you cannot forget what you hear. If you are not sure that you need to know the answer to that question, then wait. Take your time until you know. If you think that answer could interfere with your role as a wife or husband in the future, then don't ask it now. You can always make a different choice later. That is your freedom. But what commonly happens as the healing progresses is that it does become clearer, at least to you, what you do need to know and what you don't need to know.
And Mona, in all honesty, some of the reasons that betrayed spouses ask questions are not very pretty.
No, they're not.
But neither is adultery.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's not very pretty. And you want
right.
to share why you ask questions, Joe? No?
Sure. Probably, and as Mona's talking, I think we all know that is an ideal situation where
Right.
the wife's not screaming at the husband or the husband's not screaming at the wife, because sometimes questions come out of anger, and she did say that. So when they're coming out of anger or hurt, what Mike was alluding to is he felt that I was punishing him, and truthfully, that's what I was doing.
Yep.
I wanted him to hurt as much as I was hurting. So I wanted him to hear those words over and over and over. Mm-hmm. But after I heard them enough, and you do get to a place where you do hear the answers enough, that they became reminders to me that what the truth was. And that spoke volumes to me at the time, because I could say, oh, that's right. He said this was why. Or actually, why is not a question we can ask, but or when, or how. Those kinds of questions, they started putting the puzzle together.
Right.
And Mona's probably going to go there.
And it actually helped me, because it helped me understand the depth of her pain.
That's right.
And I needed that. I really did. I needed it.
You know, a point I'd like to bring up too is it's like as Mona was giving her presentation, it was awesome because it was in a perfect world.
Yeah.
Well, all I know is we were not in a perfect world
No,
when we were going through
Honey,
this.
you don't think that this is how I handle questions and answers?
It absolutely was. Most of the time.
Down the
None
road.
of the time.
Yeah, well, okay. In the
Towards the end.
early stages, that's right, because we're all learning when we're coming
Yeah.
through this, and that's why we're here. Is we really want to help the couples to try to understand that they're in a normal situation, even though it seems completely abnormal. But
Right.
one of the points I really wanted to bring up was, as you were asking questions, it became a flurry of questions. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything to any couple out there that's coming through this that doesn't get what I'm saying, is one question can just bam, 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 just come into multi-fire. And one of the things that I noticed that would start to happen is we would hit a certain area, like, a particular, issue that we might have, been going through. And then she would go into maybe she would just end up in the fetal position in the bedroom, or whatever. And then what I found myself doing is once we would start talking again, then she would go immediately back to that same question. Now, I answered the question. I was trying to be as open and honest, as transparent as possible to go through this. But one of the things that I started to find was she would start to go right back down that rabbit hole, and she would start to get in the fetal position and then be in the bedroom, in the dark for another day or so. And then and I started to get really frustrated. It wasn't like I was, wanted to be frustrated by any means, but it was like I was getting the same responses, and I couldn't understand that about you. Why are you bringing up the same thing over and over again when we know it's going to be the same question, or the same kind of outcome to that question? And one of the things that it took me a while to learn, and I can only say this to people that were the unfaithful spouses, is you have to be willing to go there again and again and again. Because one of the things that I found with Mona, and we have, like we've said, with the hundreds of couples that we've been blessed to be able to come alongside, one of the common areas is that they need to go back there because they don't really process everything at the first visit, if that makes sense. It takes them a while to wrap their brain around this. And I use the word desensitize, because it's like they need to hear it and they need to go back there again and again and again. Now, that's very, very frustrating for the offending spouse, because we're being honest, but why do we have to keep going back there? But what that's why I caution those offending spouses that, and it's always been my counsel, if I were ever to give them a suggestion, is if they need to go there 1,000 times, you need to be willing to go there 1,001, because it's only in that safe environment that Mona could process this and we could step through this. And also too, I think we ought to hit on this, is if you start hearing the same questions over and over again and you start defending yourself, saying you're just obsessing about this particular thing, it's probably because you're not going there, to his or her satisfaction. They need to talk about this, and you just need to be a safe place for them to bring this stuff, be open and honest and transparent with that, and that's when you'll see the obsession start to come down.
And if you're not willing to go there 1,000 times, plan on 3,000 times.
Yeah, amen.
Because
amen.
they'll take that as, no, you don't want to go there because you're hiding something.
Yeah, well, that's
right.
And
That's
that was
correct.
the point I was
Yeah.
going to make up.
Yeah.
Is it's like what else are you being deceptive about now?
Right.
Right. And if you can just be open and honest over a period of time,
I remember one couple that was sitting on our couch, and they had a really good counselor that they both liked, and they'd been doing well, and they ran into this problem because they had gone to the counselor, and the counselor told the betrayed wife that it had been long enough and she could no longer ask questions.
I remember that.
And it blocked their healing. So we had met with them once before, I think. But anyway, they came back because they were on this big hurdle, and she sat on my couch and she said, "This is what it feels like to me." She says, "I feel like we both, the revelation of the infidelity blew up our marriage. And so now we have this empty can between us." And she says, "For all these weeks, I feel like we've both been putting stuff back into the can, both been contributing to it." and talking, and he was answering questions. And
Right.
she said, since the visit with the counselor where he said no more questions, I feel like a lid has been slapped on that, and we're no longer filling up that can. Now, I know that may not make sense to somebody who has not been a betrayed spouse, but I'm telling you, it is so real. Believe me, I don't know one betrayed spouse that would rather not have to ask any questions. These are not fun conversations for anybody, and they are emotionally
Charged.
full
Yeah.
and
yeah.
charged, and they
Absolutely.
don't go well. But I think what we're trying to convey here is this is part of the process that if you're going to heal, you need to go through. And what we're trying to give you is some parameters that may help you get through. It will not be fast, but you can make it last longer, just like Mike said.
Yeah.
You don't want to do this, then plan on doing it 3 times as long, because it'll continue until those questions are answered.
And because, as Mona described, we're going through a traumatic state in the beginning, that our brains really aren't working.
No.
So
No.
Mike would answer a question and he'd give me the first 3 words, and I'd have to stop him almost, which is very hard when you're married to someone who is a talker and not a listener. I thought I would throw that in because I know some of you are, and how that works in your household.
There's usually one of each.
Yes. We all have them.
Yeah.
But in order to just digest what he has said or what he
Right.
has told me, in trying to give me the whole picture in his picture, it's not the same in my brain.
Right.
And so then I ask him the next question and the next question. It's usually the same question at 3 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, or it doesn't matter. But the reality is, we can hardly, and Gary did touch on this, we cannot take it all in.
Yeah.
Because
that's so
we're
true.
trying to fit it into our life during that period
Yeah.
of time.
Yeah,
That's right.
And
That's
I
right.
really like the way you brought it up earlier about putting the puzzle together, because that's what
Right.
these conversations do.
That's right.
Is there's this period of time that the offended spouse is trying to put together, because it wasn't what they thought it was. So it's like you have to give them those pieces of puzzle, and you, as the offending spouse, are the keeper of those puzzle pieces.
That's
and,
right.
and as soon as you start pulling back on that, you're going to shut down this process of your spouse recovering from this. So please be an open book. Be
Right.
that open book for them, and that will pay off just in huge dividends to you, because it really streamlines the process. And that's one of the things too that Mona hit on as well, that I thought was really important, was the fact that when a counselor or someone that is advising that no more questions, and then of course the offending spouse, they don't want to get asked questions. It's uncomfortable to go there, and I found myself saying, but I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have, and I was sincere about that. I really didn't want to, but maybe deep down inside a little bit there was, I don't want to answer any more questions if I don't have to, because it was very uncomfortable for me to
It
go
hurt
there.
you
Yeah, absolutely.
to see what you had done.
That's right, because
Yeah.
I'm tearing your heart out every time I open my mouth. But here I am, knowing in my heart of hearts that I have to be 100% transparent and honest.
And I think that is so important, because when you don't go through this process of questions and answers, as ugly as it can be, both of you miss out on part of the healing process. And I think it's just as important for the unfaithful to clearly see what happened as
Exactly.
it is for the betrayed to clearly see what happened. We talked about this in trauma a little bit, that it's unfaithful people tend to self-deceive and justify so they can look in the mirror
Yeah.
when they're being unfaithful.
And that's what that fantasy land is all about that we've
Exactly.
talked about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you're not willing to share the ugly truth with your spouse, I can almost guarantee you that what they're imagining is even uglier.
Is even
It's even
ugly.
It's
uglier.
even uglier.
That's really
right.
true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
guys, how many couples have we seen come through that we find out after talking to them, it's been 15 years
Right.
since the affair, and then you get to talking to them a little deeper, and it was like, oh, they haven't really processed anything in 15 years. And what shut it down? they quit talking about the questions and answers that the offended spouse had,
Yep.
because that might have been the counsel that they received at that point. And so they decided to just shove it down, and we'll just move through life, and we'll just get through this, and we'll forgive, and we'll forget, and no, you won't forget. And it lives right under the surface.
And truthfully, you aren't forgiving either because you haven't held it in your hand. You
That's
don't even know
exactly
what to
right.
forgive
That's
yet.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And like
Yeah.
I was just
That's right.
saying, it lives right under the surface with these couples. And as soon as any kind of conflict comes into their thing, bam, they're right back to the affair. Well, that is not the case with us. And that's not the case with a lot of the couples that have come through our thing. When you process through this, the affair, it becomes a scar. It becomes something that you'll always remember. Yes, was it a dark time? Absolutely, it was a dark time. But it's also something that doesn't have any power anymore. You can, yeah.
And instead of a scar, what you have is you haven't cleaned out the wound.
Yeah.
Right.
And then what do you have? You have pus.
Yeah. that's
Right.
And that pus festers and gets infected again,
Yeah.
and then it pops up years later.
And
No.
losing
And
our-
I
Yeah,
truly
yeah.
wish that we had been able to figure out how to process this, how to help someone put that picture together, how to help someone get a true picture of what they've done without the messiness and ugliness of this subject.
Absolutely
Questions
impossible.
and
Right,
answers.
right.
But there is not.
No.
So sometimes you just have to do the work as best you can. And we often tell couples, we can apologize for how we handled an emotion or a response. We'll both have opportunity to do that. And this is one area where most of us have plenty of opportunity. But the goal of that healthy marriage requires this. It's the part of you that, if you've ever been the parent of a little kid that had to be held down for a shot or stitches, it's a part of you that, as much as you hated holding down that precious child, you did it because the result was more important.
It was good
And
for them.
It was
Yeah,
good for
that,
them.
That was right.
You
It
know,
was
so
in their best interest. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So I can only encourage you. We all hated the questions and
Yep.
answers. I've never talked to anybody who said, "Gee, that was the funnest time and we learned so much about each other." Nobody wants to talk realistically about the sin that occurred.
That's right.
But it is a vital part of healing from infidelity. There's just no other way to get through it that I'm aware of.
And I think Joe hit upon it earlier too, about all I remember was woohoo. It was like I don't want to go there as the offended spouse. I don't want to go there and keep asking the questions because I'm hurting my spouse that much more while we process through all this. And you think, don't fall into that trap, because that forces you to shove this stuff down that only becomes resentment later on. So you need to talk about it. And
Well,
just like, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say not only that, but if they don't talk about it, Gary did not come home fully comprehending what his adultery was and what it
No,
cost.
no.
It took many, many, many conversations on this topic, questions and answers, before he had a clear picture of just what he had done.
Yeah.
And that's true, I think, of most couples.
That's true.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think
Yeah.
so. I think so. And so, as a betrayed spouse, if you're afraid to bring it up because it makes your betrayer sad, the process it through so
Yeah.
they can get healthy too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess our experience has been, I think I can speak for everybody, is the truth will come out.
Yes.
Somebody else will say it, they will find out a different way, and I'm telling you, that's a whole lot worse.
It's
It
a whole
is.
lot worse.
It is.
Yeah, that'll set you back.
This is
Yeah.
something I really believe that the enemy uses in adultery recovery, is when you start to default back to some sort of secret, what is it?
Secretiveness.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But
Keeping a secret.
you're holding a secret. It's like, I don't want to do this. And it might be all for the right reasons you're thinking. It's, I don't want to hurt them anymore. I just, it's just better that we don't talk about that. Mike is so right, because what'll happen is the enemy will just hold off on that. Let's just take an example. Maybe you ran into your affair partner, nothing, occurred, anything, of course, but you decided that, I don't really want to go home and I don't really want to share this because it's just going to blow the whole night up. And last night was kind of a bad night anyway. And so maybe we should just, and Man, that's when I say you go home, you don't pass go, you don't collect $200. You go home and you bring it up. And then there's guys, I will just generalize again, sorry, but there's people that have looked at me and go, why would you bring that up? Why would you have to do that? It's because the enemy's going to bring it up some other way. Somebody will have seen you in the grocery store, talking to this other person, and then it'll come up, and then what do? What does the offended spouse do immediately? They immediately fall to, what else are you lying to me about?
Right.
And then it just sets you back again and again and again. So just be 100% open, honest, be an open book.
There's so much power in secrets, and the only way to demolish them is to bring it into the light.
Into the light.
And, now, here's the caveat. Let's talk about this a little bit. The responsibility of the betrayed spouse when they ask their questions. Knowing what happened is not the same as knowing every detail about everything.
That's true.
Okay? So here are some questions for a betrayed spouse to ask themselves. Do I already know the answer to this question? I can remember specifically a time when Gary and I were doing the questions and answers. We were kind of in this cycle. It was like, okay, we got to do this again and do this again. And I remember asking him the question, and I already knew exactly what he was going to say. And I thought, this is so dumb. Now, that was not the last time I asked questions, but I actually got to that point, that part of desensitization, if you will. So do you already know the answer to this?
Was that the time that we were sitting in the spa and you said, do we really need to talk about this again?
Yes.
And I can tell our viewers that was the night that the clouds opened.
Yeah, right.
The beam of light from heaven came down. The angelic choir sang, hallelujah. No.
Okay. So, betrayed spouses. First question is, do I already know the answer to this? The second question is, why do I need to know this? Some people will never understand why you need to know. The hotel example that I gave you was actually a true example in a role-playing.
Oh, that's true.
Was actually a true example at a. Continue.
You went to a conference up in Sacramento, I think it was. Yeah.
The hotel issue that I spoke about earlier was actually part of a conference I attended, and it was a conference primarily made up of therapists, and they all didn't think the wife needed to know the name of the hotel. So I'm just telling you, a lot of people won't agree with that, but my triggers, my trauma went from 50 in that 2-hour drive to 10. So if, at least figure out why you need to know. It may not make sense to anybody else. And then the third question is, will it help me heal? Now that's an important question, because as Joe has already admitted, and I will admit, some of my questions were intended to hurt Gary. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to have to think about it and answer the question and hear out loud what he had done. If that's our only motive for asking, that's a wrong motive.
Yeah.
Now, I realize in the initial stages, it's going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more emotional. But as you process through the questions and answers, you're going to be able to come to a point where you really can ask yourself these questions. Do I already know the answer to this? Why do I need to know this? And will it help me heal? Cindy Beale is the author of Healing Your Marriage When Trust is Broken, and she shared her husband's response to her questions. He said, I'll answer any question you ask for the rest of my life, but will it make you feel better?
And can you imagine the freedom that the offended spouse has in knowing that she can ask, or he can ask these questions from now, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, and they have the absolute freedom. Now, that's great, because what that can do is, once they understand that they have that freedom, is they can realize do I really want to ask that particular question? It might be something that, do you really need to know that? You know, it might be something really that you may not want to have, because once you ask that question, you're going to get the answer, and you're going to be responsible to have that answer in your head for the rest of your life. So, but if you're given a time limit, well, of course you'll ask every question you can have, because you can come up with. And that's why I think it's really important that the offended spouse realizes the freedom that they have. They can ask a question from here to eternity, and they can get an answer for that. But then they don't have to necessarily ask a question that they might have thought about. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. But with my personality, and it is probably opposite of Gary's and definitely opposite of Mike's, is that I needed to ask the questions. I needed to complete the picture. And the picture was, well, what I've said in the past is, when by the time we were finished with this process, I still had a few holes in my puzzle, but I still had the whole picture. Like I might have left out part of the blue sky with one puzzle piece, and I could imagine that the rest of that spot was a blue, could have been a blue puzzle piece. The reality is, only you can determine how many questions, and because I needed the visual, which is very hard for a lot of people. I do understand that. And a lot of ladies I talk to cannot ask the questions because they don't want the pictures in their head. But I don't want you to feel guilty if you're like me, who needed to have the pictures in their head.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did you ever ask a question that you now regret that you asked?
You don't want to hear this answer.
Oh, okay.
No.
No. Okay.
No.
So you ask every question, and you see, and that's what I think is the freedom in this. I really do. Is because, but now we have had couples.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
we
have.
have.
We
that
have.
it just, the questions became a flurry, became just like this, and they just kept asking deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and more graphic and more graphic and more graphic. And they ended up with things in their brain that they didn't want.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of the viewers,
Exactly.
is it's just like, let's just say this is up to you.
Right.
But remember, it's
And know that you're one of those people who don't want to have that picture long term, or you're one of those people, in order to put the picture together, you need all the details.
Yeah.
I think one of the main points we're trying to make is that not everybody is the same
Exactly.
when they are trying to put that picture of their life together. My life with Gary for 3 years while he was in the affair, I had to figure out what that looked like.
Exactly.
But we want to give the person who needs to put that puzzle together the freedom to do it with the pieces they need, and not be dictated to by others that may not need that.
And if you're a betrayed spouse and you ask a question of the offending spouse, my role, and you're like me, not everybody is, but if you're like me, and you really are not keeping something from your spouse, you just don't remember. My suggestion would be, pray that God helps you to remember that.
Yeah.
Now, don't wait for your spouse to ask that question again. Now, this is hard. And you say, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to do that. But I'm telling you, this pays dividends many, many times over. Go to your spouse and say, I've been praying about that. And I do remember that now. And I want you to have that answer. Boy, what did you just send? What message did you send to your spouse?
Yeah.
That I know you need that truth. I'm willing to take whatever comes from this, but I want you to trust me, and I want to put our marriage back together again.
Yeah.
I want a healthy marriage.
That's huge.
Yeah, an healthy
really
marriage is a
is.
truthful marriage.
That's right. When you're willing to go in
yeah.
and just say, because we've all heard this from people that we've talked to, that, it's like, I wouldn't do, yes. But for goodness sake, don't make up stuff. To like, I think it was that, so that's what I'll go say.
Or
No.
sugarcoat it.
Don't go there. Because then that's another lie that's going to be, or it's not a lie, because maybe it was a good intention that you're thinking, I think that might have been right. Until it's clear. That's when you should.
Now, I can only imagine that there are some unfaithful people out there who are just cringing and want to turn this whole thing off because they think we're nuts. And
No,
I
it's already
get
shut
Yeah, we
off.
are.
It's already shut off.
But let me just tell you this. We're not talking about the fighting and the pain and the trauma that goes on for the rest of your life.
No.
No.
Truly,
Right.
we are
That's
not.
right.
No.
Once those questions have been answered, once that puzzle's been put back together, you both will be able to walk away from this. But let me just give you an example in Gary's and my life. I talked to a lot of people on the phone, and I think I've heard every question there was. And of course, the minute you think that, God laughs and says, "Here, try this."
Yeah.
So I was talking to a lady, and I honestly, I don't even remember what the question was, but I'd never asked Gary. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've never asked him. Now, this is probably 10 years ago. So it was probably like 15 years after the healing. And I walked into his office that day, and I said, "Hey, got a minute?" And he said, "Sure."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I have a question for you." And he goes, "Okay." And he looked at me, and I asked him the question. And he got the strangest look over his face. It's like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Because honestly, we don't talk about his adultery any. If
You know,
we didn't do this ministry,
yeah,
I
that's
don't
what
know
we
that
say.
it would
If we
come
didn't do
up.
this ministry,
we,
we
we've
wouldn't-
talked about it plenty when we went through the
Yeah,
healing. We're
yeah,
good.
for sure.
But here's the point: we can talk about it.
That's right.
So when I walked in there and I asked him that question, he went,
Yeah.
"Interesting." But then he answered my question, and I said, "Oh, okay." And I left. He went back to work. I went back to work. No pain, no anger,
No.
no
Right.
trauma. It's not something you have to avoid for the
That's-
rest
that's
of your
right.
life. So when we say, yes, be willing to answer those questions, we're talking about as a healed person, all that pain and trauma ceases with the
That's right.
pieces
With the
you
truth.
need.
Yeah,
with the
that's right.
truth.
That's right.
With the
That's
truth.
right.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
That's right. Keep
Yep.
it in the light.
Yeah.
Keep it, and
Exactly.
the enemy loses his power.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we know that, as Gary said, this is all ideal, and healing is not ideal for most of us. But there is another way to handle things if a particular answer is really disputed between the husband and wife. One really feels like it needs to be answered, and one really feels like it doesn't. So what some therapists will suggest is that you have an agreed time apart. Some will even suggest 24 hours. You pray and seek God's leading. And then you come back together and let the betrayed spouse decide. And that is the decision that has gone with.
But even that's not a final decision. If that's
Right.
okay now, but it comes up again 5 years down the road, then
Right.
it comes up 5 years down the road.
That's
Right.
months
Thank
down
you.
the
road. 6 months
Because
down the road.
that's
maybe
right.
that betrayed spouse is going to say, "Okay, you have some points.
Yeah.
I'll hold off on that."
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mike. That's the freedom here.
That's right.
That's the freedom. No pressure.
Yeah.
We hope that this helps both of you deal with the reality of these discussions. It will never be a nice discussion. There's too much pain, there's too many emotions, but we can do some things to not make it worse or more difficult. So now we'd ask you to take some time and look over the right-hand column of your handout. And this is titled, "When is Enough Enough?" This chart can be a conversation tool for the couple struggling with this issue. And I would suggest later in their healing
Much
process.
later, yes.
Yeah, this is not something to really chat about in the
Yeah.
initial stages. But it can give both of you some insights into what is behind the questions and what is behind the answers. And understanding some of this can take down that emotional volatility. What you do during the healing process will not be for the rest of your life.
No.
That's right.
And just like that example I gave you, that's probably one question I've asked in 25 years almost.
The irony is, neither one of us can remember what
That the
that
question was, yeah.
Yeah. So.
But the goal is for healing. The goal is a healthy marriage.
Amen.
A marriage with love, trust, intimacy, and respect. But the adultery does not have to be an obstacle in every room that you stumble
Right.
over for the rest
No.
of your life.
Right.
Right.
Work together to heal your marriage. Let the light of truth destroy secrets and do your best to heal because it's worth it. Mike and Joe would tell you that,
Yep.
and Gary and I would tell you that.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.